Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us for what will be the last panel of the day. We'll be closing with a keynote after this session, but this will be our final actual panel discussion. Closing, as I just said, on a very exciting note on ESG data and the green transition, whether it's a hindrance or whether it's a help. And hopefully we will conclude by the end of this, it is in fact a help. And I think ties into everything that we've discussed in the conference over the last 2 days. Data is a key challenge. Whenever you talk to people in the industry about what challenges are that they're facing, it always ends up coming back to data, the need for quality data, dense data. So this is what we'll be exploring today. So I'm joined by some excellent panelists. If you guys would like to start coming up onto the stage. So Theodora Antonakaki, who is Director of Climate Change and Sustainability at the Bank of Greece. Nicolette Bartlett, or Nikki, who is Chief Impact Officer at CDP. Christiaen, who is Data, Innovation and Impact Lead at Oxford Sustainable Finance Programme. And Antonius Panagiotopoulos, I'm so sorry. That's me being very British and not being able to pronounce names very right, but there we go. Who is Executive Director of ESG and Climate Research at MSCI. So thank you, everyone. Welcome. Let's try and keep this as lively as possible for our remaining panel. So just to start, maybe I'd like each of you just to introduce yourselves and maybe give us a very quick overview of kind of how your organisation and how you within your role are looking at the issue of data. And Dora, you will be in a hot seat because you're next to me. I'll turn to you.
Thank you, Emma. Thanks, many thanks to OMFIF as well, and to the Institute for organizing once again a great conference. Looking forward to the next one as well, since we are almost at the last part of this event. At the Bank of Greece, we've been working on climate and sustainability issues over 12, 13 years now. We started back in 2009. It was actually a trigger that we had ever since the Stern Review in 2007 to actually be able to study the impact of climate change for the Greek economy, for the country of Greece. And ever since, our effort has moved from the study of climate change, has moved to policy making. So we have been addressing issues needed for adaptation, for the adaptation strategies in Greece. From there on, we also moved to different sectors, to study different sectors like the tourism sector. Well, in all this trip, the issue of data has been always crucial. Data has not always been there, but in a way, through synergies and through working with the right people, the right experts, we have been able to create a substantial database of data needed for people that want to monitor and see how the issue of climate change is moving in Greece. Now, this, of course, does not address the whole spectrum of ESG data and what we are here to talk today, but I wanted to start with that as an example of how we can work around the issues of on the lack of data. We have to be creative, we have to look for synergies, we have to move to other disciplines. The discussion needs to move way beyond the financial sector and actors of the financial system, because the real data is out there. It stays with someone else at the moment, and we need to get everyone together to be able to make it useful for actually assessing the risks that all the ESG spectrum has to offer as an opportunity as well. So that is a starting point for me.
No, excellent. And obviously we'll come back to a lot of those issues in a little bit. Christophe, you are actually the only academic that we have had over the last 2 days. So,
wow.
And I think perhaps a core element of kind of bridging the gap, which Dora was just talking about, I think. So could you tell me a little bit about kind of what Oxford is doing in this space, how you're working with some of the other institutions and sectors, and what that's kind of looking like?
Thank you very much, Emma and OMFIF, for the invitation and having me present here today. To be the only academic in the room is a bit daunting. I'm not even a real academic, I'm not a doctor. So any real academic in the room, I apologize for taking this role. And my girlfriend is one, so she would definitely be quite upset. But at the Oxford Sustainable Finance Group, we're a research group at the University of Oxford. We've been looking at sustainable finance for the last 10 years almost. So the group is led by Dr. Ben Caldecott, who really started a lot of the work around stranded assets and stranded asset risk. So a lot of our work has been built on data, and particularly asset data, asset level data, out of which we've developed various research programs. I lead a few programs, particularly on asset data, asset level data, geospatial data, and trying to find ways to use the data that is out there, that is available from a range of sources, and make that relevant for financial institutions, but particularly for sustainable finance, climate, environmental risk. All these issues come up with new methodologies and metrics, and all of this is in the open domain in papers and data sets. So we very much believe there's a lot of data out there that could and should be used. In terms of how we work with others, and particularly maybe with some institutions in the room, we run various research programs funded by government or private institutions. We work a lot with banks. We work a lot with pension funds. We've done some work, also my colleagues have done some work on the back of the CBES exercise, the Bank of England, around the learnings and next steps around that, which was published yesterday, I believe. So we really try to stay close to the practitioner side and the financial sector, both on the regulator and the let's say the institution side, but also try and stimulate more better new data and new players coming into this space to bring us the transparency that we need. Wonderful. And yeah, we'll go into how we can get better, newer, denser data a little bit later. Just before I go on to Antonius, we will be doing a poll in this discussion, which we'll reveal at the end of the session, and I'll put it to the panelists. So the question will be: do you have the correct data sets and tools to adequately report on climate impact on your portfolio and your assets? So for our audience, please do go on the app and answer there. For our virtual audience, it should be popping up on your swap card, and we will come back to that. But Antonius, back to you on MSCI, what you're doing in the data space, what your role involves with looking at data.
Thank you. So first of all, a big thanks for the invite. A big thank you also to the panelists for being here with me. I understand this is going to be a tough session, being after lunch, and it's going to be about data, so bear with us. We are going to try to make it as lively as possible. My name is Antonius. I'm with MSCI for the past 8 years. Prior to that, I was actually in the oil and gas industry. So after switching to the brighter side of things with sustainability, I've been the industry lead for oil and gas for past 7-8 years. And also, more recently, I've been dealing with climate scenarios, analysis. MSCI is the biggest ESG data provider. Our clients are asset owners, pension funds, asset managers, even issuers these days. Issuers are more interested about ESG, so it's a sign of where things are going. Data is essential for what we do. There is a very distinct, if you like, in my mind, a very distinct, a very valid, actually, distinction between reported and estimated data. This is what drives the discussion. Reported data is expected to increase, not only by the influence of regulations, but also by the demand of investors. This is the upside, if you like, at the end of the journey. However, to get there, there are so many blind spots when it comes to investors, right? There are so many blind spots when it comes to portfolio, to risk management. There are so many gaps when it comes to asset classes, coverage. And again, I understand this is the after the lunch session. I'm going to stick to very basic numbers. Out of 10,000 companies, only 50% report scope 1 and 2. And when you go to scope 3, because it was mentioned before, and it's kind of my pet peeve, scope 3 emissions, only 25% of the 10,000 companies, so a fourth, report only one category of Scope 3. So that doesn't mean, or we're very far away from complete disclosures in Scope 3. And for the people in the audience that are more interested in Scope 3, although I understand that this may be a bit of a novelty, most companies would report on employee commute and business travel, which are the parts that impact the least the footprint. So something is not actually working there, and that's why that highlights the fact that was mentioned in other sessions as well, the fact that we need methodologies, we need academia, we need ways to figure out what are the blind spots, because there are many. And I don't think that either investors or even at this stage the public can wait for when companies are going to be able to report. There is a bigger demand at the moment to have actual data in the same fashion that we do financial information. I'm going to stop here. Thank you very much.
No, so would you say that there is still a kind of an uncertainty in terms of where the data gaps actually are, and then we need to move on to how to close them, or do you think we're kind of getting closer to understanding where the data gaps actually
There are so many data gaps, so I would start with the other kind of question. What do you want to achieve? And where do you want to achieve that? And then we can speak about what the appropriate data is going to be.
Yeah.
Sorry.
To make this a bit more lively, maybe
Yeah,
just
go on.
commenting, like, another question would be, what can we already do with the data that exists and is out there? So.
Okay, let's come back to that. And Nikki, yes, please introduce yourself, CDP, and what CDP is doing in this space.
Thank you. Thanks, Emma, and delighted to be at another one of your really well-run conferences.
It's always a pleasure to have you.
So, Nikki Bartlett, Chief Impact Officer at CDP. CDP's a not-for-profit global that is the only independent global disclosure mechanism. We've been running for 22 years, and we cover climate, water, and forest issues. We're bringing in biodiversity and plastics and plan to expand across the entire environmental sort of boundary space. And I couldn't agree more with the gaps, right? And I think I tend to think of it in sort of 4 different ways. There's a breadth problem, a depth problem, a standardization problem, because even if you've solved those first 2 and you haven't standardized, you've still got a problem. And then critically, and most importantly, the whole point of it is to change decision making. And if you've done all that work and you don't change decision making, it was pointless. And I do worry about that sometimes, because our instincts will be where there is data. And we will do it simplistically, because we will try and compare environments and physics to financial. And they are very different things. And so, we've been very focused for 22 years on putting environmental information into decision making. But the point is that one comes from one domain of the world. The other comes from systems we've created. And the two, to translate one into the other, is clearly the road we're on right now. But we may have issues with that and make simplistic choices as a result, which could have unintended consequences while we're waiting for the perfect data. And so I just always remembering it's the right indicators, and that secondly, it's not the finance sector that changes the decisions. And it's not the finance sector that needs to do some serious capital allocation. It's the real economy. And this gets forgotten, right? So yes, the finance sector will provide a lot of that fuel. But the stuff's built and made by the real economy. And it's their CapEx decisions that matter. And it's the influence that investors have on that really matters, right? And also their influence they have even more critically on their supply chains. So I always kind of come back to that, so that we make sure we're focused on the right indicators, and we don't, try and, because we have data in an area, we therefore use that to make decisions, when actually that data is not at all meaningful for the decision you're trying to make, and that and your point about reporting versus estimated and model data, couldn't agree more. And the point of reporting should be such that it drives better decision-making in real economy. And that's the other side of the reporting conversation, which is not just, I sometimes say, to the irritation of a lot of people at CDP, we don't drive our mechanism to get data. We have the data, so we have the legitimacy to drive our disclosure mechanism, because the two things together is what is trying to change those decisions. But I think it's just really important. We must always remember what the data is for in the first place.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think we can go back to the point on engaging in real economy, getting that data and information from the real economy a little bit later, as well as the issue with reporting. But maybe just to take a little bit step back, because also over the last 2 days, we've been hearing a lot about the NGFS. The NGFS has had a work stream dedicated to closing the data gap. So Dora, as our central banker on the panel, it'd be great just to hear from you a little bit in terms of what that work stream has found, has been doing. It's actually finished now. Not to say that they're no longer looking at data issues anymore, but it's been incorporated into some of their other work streams. So it would be great just to hear a little bit in terms of what they were doing.
It's a living work, actually.
Sure.
We have the NGFS directory. First of all, let me say that the NGFS has been doing an amazing work over the past years in bringing all of us supervisors and central banks together in actually moving forward and providing the resource to do so. It's been for most central banks and supervisors a new issue, the issue of ESG, and especially the issue of climate and environmental risks. So there, not all of us are capable of having the right resources to deal with these issues and incorporate all those parameters into our day-to-day business in various business areas that we do. So the NGFS has been instrumental in actually mobilizing resources, providing us the right guidance and the roadmaps to be able to do so. And for that, we are all very, very grateful. Of course, all central banks are trying to mobilize through NGFS and support the work that the NGFS is doing, because it's each and every one of the members of the NGFS that are participating in the work streams that are doing this work. At the Bank of Greece, we have been a member of the NGFS since 2019. And we are participating now in all work streams and task forces. The one on bridging data gaps started around a couple of years ago and published a first report and then a second report based on the preliminary data and based on a public consultation as well. The data directory is now on, and it's a living directory that's being updated and can be used as a source of where and what you can find in terms of data. Very useful tool for everyone who is trying to assess what's happening. And I couldn't agree more with what everyone in the panel said. I'd like to stay with what Nikki said on what we want to achieve at the end of the day. This is very important. We have to keep that question in mind. Along the way, in terms of data and using data, there's going to be a lot of hindrance. That's part of the title of the session. But instead of the hindrance, we have to look at that in a creative and positive way to move along, because we have a certain goal. We need to be able to assess what we can assess. We need to be able to plan ahead, and those data are critical in how we're going to move on with transition planning and target setting. And of course, we have to improve, because at the end of the day, we all need a better footprint for everyone. As for Scope 3, I think the most important factor in the game of Scope 3 is the network effect. Because once you move out of how you're monitoring and assessing your own self and get in the game other players through Scope 3, I think we'll have a multiplier effect, the network effect on that. And we are looking forward to what Antonio said, that looking forward to more of us reporting on Scope 3 and being able to have that benefit of the network.
And in terms of the directory, what's been the uptake of that so far? Like, how has it been utilized? Has it been utilized? Like, have you had much reaction from the market?
I couldn't say that much about how it has been used so far because I haven't been part of this group of the NGFS. But it seems that there's been feedback that has been very useful because the directory is moving ahead with new additions and new updates on what's up there. The important is that it's a living document, a living directory. There is a lot of thought about how to utilize it even more. It has been branded as a public good, which is indeed a public good by the NGFS, provided to the whole of the financial sector that can be able to use and utilize it and move ahead.
No, thank you. So yeah, maybe let's go back to this question of how we close the data gaps, but also then.
Can I?
Of course, no, please.
Just for the NGFS, because
absolutely.
it's really important to I just want to link it back to what Nikki was saying before about the real economy. The NGFS and the ability that you can have physical intensities per industry is essential to be able to link it back to the real economy. And I just want to highlight that on the other point of the living document, what NGFS undertook is a massive, massive work. The fact that they are open to feedback, because there have been some issues with BECS and biomass and how they are projecting the biomass savings into the future. The fact that NGFS is open, is living, and actually in the phase 3, they have come back with better data. I think that is a testament of how, what a tool it can be for the whole of the financial system. I'm just going to stop here.
An excellent point. And maybe what we can do, connect with the NGFS after this and send it to our audience so you can see it. Is there anyone in our audience who has used the directory? No? Okay. We'll send it afterwards. But yeah, so going back to the question of how we close the data gaps, but also importantly, what do we do with the data? And actually, why are we trying to close these data gaps? What's the aim? What's the goal with this? Christophe, maybe I can go to you first with that.
Why we try to close the data gaps? I think it's a good question, and I think so. I agree there's data gaps. I think particularly around the usability of them, comparability, quality of it. I don't think it's a quantity of data issue or the right type of data for particularly some transition or sustainability issues that we're interested in. I think there's a lot of data available in various sources, not necessarily all in disclosures. There's a lot of data information about the real economy that sits in NGOs, governments, academia, that can be used to build a picture about what's going on in the real economy. Then it's harder, of course, how do you link that to companies and portfolios, but it's not insurmountable. So I'm more interested in the question, like, what can we do with the data that we have rather than waiting for perfect and complete disclosure, which hopefully is going to come and is absolutely critical to refine all the insights that we need. But if we want to get to the transition, and if the point is to get a green transition, let's start with the data that we have looking at the real economy and the transition. We know there's pathways for each sector, more or less. There's a lot of data per sector about the biggest polluters, even like assets level data about the main sectors. There is a lot of modeling and estimation you can do for these sectors. So there's somewhere to start, and we don't need to wait for perfect, complete disclosure by all the companies in these sectors. I also don't fully agree. I mean, disclose data better than estimated data. Yes, maybe. I guess ideally a company discloses their own data, but it doesn't mean because data is disclosed, it's not also not estimated. Like if we talk about the carbon emissions of flights, or whatever was in scope 3, they will also be based on estimates of the carbon intensity of the number of miles, etc. So while I think there's obviously difference and nuances, it doesn't mean that starting with estimated data I don't think is a bad thing. And we shouldn't try and wait or keep saying we don't have the right data to take the next steps, the steps that we need to take, as Nikki said.
I think it's both ways. For sure, the fact that there is not the the right amount of or the right data at the moment in full coverage. So I have, and I'm going to be specific, because like when a company issues a target and they do not disclose the present value of the target, there is no way that you can measure progress. There is no way that you can tie the incentive compensation of the executive director back to the target, because the company has not disclosed the present value. I can estimate what the present value is going to be, but unless this is a disclosed number by the company, me as an investor or the public cannot go back to them saying that you have not made your target, so why are you being paid? So I understand that when we need to do the real economy or to measure some impacts, there's definitely data that we can use, but there's definitely the onus goes back to the companies to be able to disclose the things that they need to disclose in a way. Because those are the disclosures that you can only get from the companies. It's not something that you can estimate. You can estimate emissions to a certain extent, and you can say, this company has never disclosed, so I need to be able to give my clients, the investors, anyone that has this portfolio, that has this company in his portfolio, an idea of what the exposure in your portfolio is coming from this specific company. But if I am to engage this company, and I picked it up in the previous panel, and transform this company as opposed to divest from it, I need some data from them. Mm-hmm. It cannot be like it cannot be like faith-based investing. Like, you need to have some data, especially if you are a climate-focused investor. You need to see progress. You need to be able to see certain things that you can only get from company disclosures.
I think we need some corporates in the room, don't we?
Yeah.
Nikki, you were.
Yeah, I mean, I think in principle your theory's sound, absolutely. And I think the first thing to say is that, you know, we're in plan C mode here, right? Like, having data and expecting, what we're trying to do is get the finance sector to at least price in the very actual real risk there is already. And we have to pussyfoot around the whole thing, right? Because plan A and plan B has not worked yet, which is large, massive macroeconomic signals that there's like a massive societal transition underway, which would mean they would naturally place it in, and we'd have some losers and we'd have some winners. Right? I'm just being like really frank. So we're in plan C mode. I won't even bore you with plan B. And this all needed to happen. This bit, plan C, is like a layering that happens naturally once you've gone through these. But now we're trying to make plan C do plan A's job a little bit, right? We are. We can pretend otherwise, but we really are. You know, the finance sector shouldn't have to have this level of perfect data to know that there's a problem. Okay, but it's where we are. So from your perspective, yes, let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. On the other hand, the reporting data is less about the information and more about the accountability. Without the reporting piece, you have no mechanism. If you think about what happened in financial markets, you need something to be able to hold companies to account with. So it's not that they reported the data. If I have their target from some other source, or they report the data, right? Or I've estimated that. You can't estimate a target, but let's just say you could, right? Bad example. Even with between those two, I have nothing that I can hold them to account to if it's estimated on my part. And so I think we need to use the estimation as far as we can go. We need to be transparent about our methodologies for how we did some of that modeling. And I know that's tricky in today's world, because, like, you know, business models are built on that, and rightly so. You know, I've got a smart modeling team supposed to be making money from that, right? So you've got a tension, right? You're going to have a tension with open source data versus not behind paywall data. It's going to be the story of our lives, right? But I think we can't get away from the fact that the reporting is also about corporate governance. It's also about the finance sector's corporate governance. It having to report, which was a beautiful wake-up moment halfway through the TCFD. I loved it when suddenly the finance sector, we're not just users of this data. This is really bad news. What is scope 3? What is scope? Do we have scope 3? It was a really funny moment in the finance sector. So I agree we should use what's there, and it shouldn't just be from reported data, and actually you can do a lot with asset level data and estimations, and you guys have done some amazing work. But we do have to get into corporate governance. And if we just, if I hear one more person do blockchain AI and we'll also have it all solved in the satellite data, I'll just burst into tears, because unless it's in governance and changes decision making, it makes no difference. It's just data.
Christophe, do you have a response to that, I guess?
I mean, about the power of blockchain, AI, and satellite data.
Maybe
Talk
less of that.
No, absolutely. I fully agree as well, right? If there's a governance thing, then fine. And a lot of engagements that I've seen of understand also are around making companies disclose. So it's a governance thing, perfectly fine. But if in the background, we also want to decarbonize the real economy. And when we're talking about getting corporates to disclose, again, we have the biggest ones or the publicly listed ones. There's a lot of other asset classes, or the role of banks with direct client relationships. They can do a whole bunch of other things and have different levers to pull. So again, it depends on the situation you're in, the type of financial institution you are, what you try to achieve with the data, about what type of data you can already be using to make some of those decisions or capital allocations or whatever. So absolutely, this whole discussion is highly nuanced, but I am often frustrated in some of these debates or discussions, and in many kind of fora, including the ones we host ourselves, that data is still that often put forward as the main hindrance of doing what we need to do. And what we need to do is decarbonize the real economy. I fully agree. And the finance sector is it's not the one who's going to be doing it. But if everyone commits to becoming net zero by whenever, use your influence you have through whatever means to get there.
Yeah, I want to come back to how we use the data that we do have, and also how we can maybe engage the real economy a little bit better to get that data. But Dora, I'd like just to hear from you in terms of how central banks are helping to support this kind of transition with data, and helping the financial sector kind of utilize that data and helping to develop that data as well.
Oh, well, over the last couple of years, we had great developments in terms of central banking work, both through the NGFS, but also individually. So we've seen how the European Central Bank, for example, has started an action plan on climate change, how this all has fitted into its strategy. Actually, today we had the publication of the disclosures for the non-monetary policy portfolios, the carbon footprint. A few weeks ago, we had the publication, the start of a series of publications on new experimental statistical data about climate. So there's a lot of things going on in terms of data, both on how the central banks are utilizing existing data, but also in the way that they are actually driving the change that we need to move forward. Of course, a whole lot of those data is experimental. They come with disclaimers. They come with a first set of methodologies that we are committed to develop further, and come back to the target setting, and come back to how we assess the work that we are doing. It's very clear that it's just a starting point, and lack of or hindrance provided by the data, it's not going to stop us. We have to move along, and we have to head in this way. At the Bank of Greece as well, over the time, I also mentioned what we have been doing with data in different areas. And for example, when I talked about the earlier studies we did like 10 and 12 years ago, back then there were not methodologies to actually be able to discuss about the value in terms of the economic value of the impact of climate change. For many of those, many of those instances, new methodologies were created, or best practices were we tried with best practices to kind of bring them back into the national context. we had to move somehow, and that's what we did. Being very, very clear about how little or how big we could be at any given moment. Just making small steps, but also being able to say, yes, we can do it better, and go back as well and progress even more the next time around. I think in terms of policy making, it's very clear that we have to everyone from the position that anyone is at the moment and working on. We have to move with disclosures, we have to move with reporting. The policy making needs to be there. States and governments need to move along and create the context for each and every one of us to play its own part in this game.
No, yeah, very, very true. I'm going to ask one more question, and I would like to open it up to the floor for our audience to get some engagement from you guys as well. So please do have a couple of questions ready. So yeah, I'd just like to go back to kind of how we use the data that we have, and back to the ultimate question of how we drive more dense, more quality data. We talked a little bit already about kind of like corporations, but let's go a little bit deeper into that. And Nikki, maybe I can turn to you first.
I mean, if I were to focus on reported data, the gaps are so massive it's almost silly. We've just been doing stuff like, we may have one of the biggest reported data sets on this, and it's tiny. It's absolutely tiny. The coverage is, if we compare it to what's needed for just taking the simplistic of, how many scope 1 emissions are sitting in the companies that report through us. So forget if they even report their whole scope 1. So just the scope 1 that we know they have, right? Because you can find it somewhere, against that country's, emissions. I mean, it's like these teeny little dots inside of this massive. So we're like, oh great, we're doing well. Because, we have this but right now the scale of the momentum is massive, right? We have, for the last 3 years, I mean, we're creaking at the sides of our little funny old system, and we're transforming everything to try and deal with it, because it's 42% on average year-on-year growth coming into the system, and most of that is coming from Asia, and that's what's really exciting. But we are not even scratching, so we need to scale in Asian countries 7 to 8 times. Japan, it's very much already there, but the rest of APAC, 7 to 8 times. We've estimated for North America and Europe together, large companies, we probably need 3 to 4 times the scale. And millions of SMEs need to come into the system. And because of banking portfolios, right? And they just don't have the data, and they could be a really powerful driver of this.
How can we support SMEs? Because this is again a big issue that we hear, right?
Yeah.
Is that they don't have the capability to get the data to.
Exactly.
So
Simplified tools for them. There's the SME Climate Hub. We've worked with others to build. People can partner to build very simple. So they just need we've got a simplified reporting framework for them. They can have estimated tools. There are all sorts of tools for them to use. Because remember, it's also about changing their decisions. But really, with SMEs, you're getting into the banking decisions. And that's where it gets interesting, because they're a big client-facing machine, right? They're very different to the other. They're like not the same as any of the other financial actors, because they're a big client. Their identity and their model is based on facing clients. And so the minute that that's there, and they have an ability to bring it into their due diligence and their day-to-day client conversations, you could have a ripple effect that's kind of off the charts. And so I think, and for many big companies, they've come to us. We have about 280 companies. Some of them are governments, interestingly. The federal government of the United States, for example, is one of our supply chain members. And their big procurers all have to disclose through CDP now. And we've got, Walmart, all of these big companies around the world. They've got about 6.4 trillion in purchasing power. That's very powerful lever. And they've done their sort of stage 1 top tier procurers who, people get excited about supply chains, thinks it's going to be SMEs. Your top tier of most top tiers is top tiers. So it's like the same companies. But the next layer down, now we're hitting completely new places, completely new markets, completely new size of companies. And so I think the gap is large, but I think we're starting to have the drivers that could scale it. That's what we're seeing. And then regulation is coming up. And the truth is, there's even more of a driver. Now, regulation will take a while to even get to where it needs to be, because it's not standardized yet. No one's focusing on the data models. No one's focusing on the digital standards. They are, but not at the scale at which they're doing the actual the actual requirement in the regulation, right? But so you'll have this lag time, but what it does is it sends the message that you need to get ready for this, which means most companies will start and jump in now. So I think we're going to start to see, hopefully, some exponential change start to kick in over the next few years.
Anthony, do you have anything to add to that?
I just wanted to mention, because I've been the fact that small and medium companies may not be able to report is starting to rub me the wrong way, and I will explain this. I consider that the opportunity cost of not doing the reporting is actually going to cost you more in the future. So I urge for the extension of the how can I put it, of the time horizon. That the time horizon cannot be the next 6 months. Oh, yeah, we need to invest in reporting solutions, and that's a no because it costs. It will cost more not having access to finance, not having access to capital. So that's one. I also wanted to mention on the overall, I didn't mention it before, but I think we should all just clap for PCAF and the fact that the work that they've done, the fact that they now, it's not only about being able to cover your whole portfolio, it's about being able to do so transparently. I cannot stress that enough. I will put a completely, in my analysis, I will put a completely different confidence level to the companies that have reported with 1 or 2, rather than the companies that have reported under 4 and 5. And that just makes sense, because you know that there's going to be more blind spots on the 4 and 5 as opposed to the 1 and 2. So in terms of the progress that we're making, we are making, again, I'm going to lend something from the energy transition. The speed and the scale are the 2 most important things. Equally, for where we are now with data, speed and scale also play a role in being able to give to investors a real view of the company. So overall, yes, there are many problems, and there are, I will go back to the beginning, that there are the blind spots are immense, and that's why we need real world economy data, or that's why we need to cover the blind spots at least with an estimation. But that should not stop us from actually kind of looking for the Holy Grail. Again, the Holy Grail being the disclosed data, right? But not in that fashion.
Yeah.
But yeah, when it comes to regulations, and again to Nikki's point before, on Asia, Hong Kong, Singapore, Australia, they're moving ahead with climate regulations. So you should be expecting some influx from there. Africa was mentioned before. The efforts that South Africa is making are immense, and they should be highlighted. Other jurisdictions, okay, yes, the EU will always be where it is because of our combined efforts, but at the end of the day, we should be expecting that this should expand.
Yeah, Christophe?
Sorry, I'm going to stop.
No, it's okay, Christophe.
I agree. We should not stop finding the Holy Grail in disclosures. But we should not focus purely on trying to get ultimate and perfect disclosures without starting with disclosures that we have, or the data we have, to engage with the real economy to drive the green transition. So this can happen perfectly in parallel. So there's multiple green or holy golden grails if we want. And that's, I think, where the use of data and how it's being used, or not properly enough being used to drive real economy change and use the levers financial institutions have, I think is more interesting, and it's probably where the debate should go next, while let's say the disclosure train gets full speed and gets us there for SMEs and all jurisdictions. I did one on the kind of the banks point. I think they're a super interesting player also with the client-facing SME side of things. But some of the arguments I've then heard from banking side is, if we start asking our clients for this type of data, then they'll go to another bank because they don't want to report. So, you can, again, it's another one of these data excuses, right? So
they are terrified of it. They are terrified of it,
banks
because you can really see what drives a bank, their clients. This is when it wasn't the scope 3 that killed them. It was, I mean, they were kicking and screaming about that too, don't get me wrong. But this, now it's really getting scary because they have to talk to their clients about it. But they're pretty much getting that, again, the opportunity cost, the liability risk on them is so massive, right?
good.
Yeah, exactly.
But then, yeah, we all use our influence. But the same, like these SMEs, in the same way, they are starting to have to report also to their clients or their suppliers, right? There's pressure coming from their actual business models rather than from their financiers. So in a way, finance and that, or banking to some degree in SMEs, is running behind. So I don't know. I think it's time as a community to move on from that lack of data discussion to, with the data we have, what do we do, and then how do we get the last mile of the data? But I think there's good signs with this.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Yeah, we have one over there. Thank you.
Hi, Marina Petrola, Istanbul Fetch. Thank you for the discussion. Very enlightening. Do you think the CSRD, when the data starts coming, will be kind of a watershed moment? The European Sustainability Reporting Directive.
I think all of them, and the only I would say both the ESRS from the CRB, and then also the ISSB, which is the US, if you like, or global part. I think that they're definitely pushing towards the right direction. The only problem that we see as emerging is that for a global investor, you may need to arbitrage between different regions, because there are going to be different standards. You need to be able to have the knowledge of the differences and then be able to bridge that within your portfolio. So this is the only problem that we are seeing, but then in terms of direction, definitely in the right direction, for sure. Talking about the real economy, and again, apologies for going so detailed into the data, we do not have a breakdown of capital expenditures. The companies themselves do not provide a breakdown, either that is taxonomy aligned or whether it's aligned within their corporate governance kind of principles, or what the plan is, the strategy. We have strategy X, and we allocate X capex to that strategy. That is not happening. So the regulations are definitely pushing towards that direction, and I think that we are all going to be pleased when more and more companies report under those regulations.
Do we have any insight into kind of how corporates are responding to the fact that CSRD is coming, whether they're ready, what that's kind of gonna look like? It's maybe a very difficult question for this room, to be honest, but it's maybe one to think about.
I think they're freaking out, for sure, on the sense that suddenly they need to. But again, if you are in an industry and you do not know the negative consequences of your operations or your supply chain or your product, if you want to go into the scope 3, maybe you shouldn't be in that business, right? I don't want to. It is part of the package. You need to know whether you're reporting or not. Eventually you will report, but saying that you don't know, it's actually worse. I would be even happier with a company that says, I know, but I'm not reporting, as opposed to, oh, I don't know.
Mm. So how can the financial sector support corporates? Beyond just talking, yes, I need to disclose, and yes, there's regulation, and yes, that's coming, that's something they have to tackle. How can the financial sector actually support the corporations as they do this? How can we work with the clients, with the industry to kind of be like, this is the information that we need, this is what we need you to do?
I think the finance sector, well, there's no the finance sector, right? You know, obviously. And what's happening in the United States right now is like off the charts silly, right? And bad and really damaging. It's the next phase of like really damaging headwinds. And it's why we don't have plan A and plan B, right? So I think ultimately this is about step one, the significant risk that exists being translated into something that the finance sector can price into something, okay? If you're not going to get it externality priced into the macroeconomy, you're going to need to do it there quite fast. And we're way behind. So the standards coming forward, fantastic. I think there does need to be a global baseline, 1.0 ISSB aligned. It's why we're going to implement that as fast as possible. But then I think the finance sector could get, those in the finance sector that get this risk, and I think the asset owners could be a real driver in the long run, the pension funds, because really they're probably the only institution on the planet that actually has a legal duty to care about the next generation, or at least 10 years from now. Literally no other institution, apart from maybe, I don't know, King's, right? So it sounds insane, but it's kind of true. So I think they could become a driving force both at the policy table to support this, right? So when the headwinds come, they're there. And then also making it, we need to get it out, as geeky as it is and as boring as it is, we need to get it out into the debate of normal people, which pension funds could do, because they're actually the clients. There's no dudes with suits. They're just the middlemen. The actual owners is me, you, like we're the actual owners of those assets, right? And we just haven't translated that conversation into society. I think that is a really important thing, that you can see it to start happening, but it hasn't happened at scale yet. I think banks have tried to make themselves personable, but I think it's the pensions that could actually activate people, because we have to go back to plan A again at some point.
Follow the money. Just follow the money. There's no other way, and that's why banks play an important role, because it's the financing. Yeah. As long as you set rules about the rules of engagement, the rules of financing, then you should be able to come better at the end of it, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And we do have a lot of more complex work ahead.
Yeah.
I mean, if you imagine this is just a starting point, setting up the frameworks and everything together for climate. We have biodiversity ahead. We have all sorts of environmental issues ahead. They are much more local in impact, but also in terms of solutions, driving solutions. We have to be able to manage that transition as well. We have a lot of things coming ahead, and we have to work more with other disciplines. It's really important. I mean, beyond the financial sector, let's move into the science disciplines. Let's get them together with people from actors of the financial system to get the equation right and get the data rolling, because there's a lot to do there.
Yeah, absolutely. And building on that, I think one thing finance, I mean, they're starting to do it and should be doing across all types of financial institutions is, if we want to price these issues in, we need to have people in financial institutions that understand these issues. Yeah. They need to have but they need to have the time to look at data that is more than an ESG rating that aggregates everything, or even a single, particularly for nature biodiversity. There's many different things and complexities to consider. There needs to be time for the analysts to understand and incorporate this. There need to be people that can handle with these new types of data, different types of data, and understand what it means, and that can then translate it. And it's going to cost time and effort and money probably, and cost maybe more to manage these type of funds. But again, if we're all serious about getting to the end goal, this is what should happen, and what can easily be done right now. I mean, you're taking away all my colleagues.
Another thing that came out of the NGF's work on data was the lack of biophysical impact data and also the lack of geospatial data. I mean, biophysical sciences and geospatial sciences have done amazing work over the last decades. And let's say the sectors that work with the economy need to follow suit. The research on the economy, economists need to follow suit. From my understanding, there is a great gap there in the understanding that economy researchers have for the work that sciences on the geospatial discipline are doing. Geographers, urbanists, everyone is doing amazing work with the geographical information systems, and all this needs to come into the research economy. I think they're lagging much behind. So I think number one is synergies with other disciplines there, if we are to move beyond and be able to tackle the challenges that lay ahead.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think I touched on this yesterday, but one of the interesting things that came out of the stress testing session, I think, is the fact that we're so kind of lacking in being able to understand what's happening geopolitically in terms of when we're managing and understanding risk, and I think that's, yeah.
Absolutely right,
really,
absolutely.
Really do we have any other questions from the audience at this point? Yeah.
Emily Homer from Robeco. I have a question linking back to the discussions that we were having this morning about transition finance and the need to really invest in the climate solutions. How, in your opinion, can data help with that? What type of data do we need? And I think as an investor, we often struggle with where is the most impactful investment we can make. So I'd be interested to get the panel's view on that.
Who would like to take that first?
I think this is exactly the right question, right? Because that's really what we shouldn't let our focus on the perfect standardized, quite frankly, basic data yet stop us from the actual transition and the information we need for that. And yet you need that stuff. The transition data that you need is built on that stuff. That's obviously, so there's the data from the past, and then, and we've got like a 5-stage journey that we've seen sort of this go through, and each of these phases have a moment when it starts to happen in practice, then there's standards, then there's regulation, right? And the lag time between each of those is speeding up, which is quite good. And I think there's a clear focus now on that transition finance. There's been a lot of focus from different groups, GFANs and others, on what does that mean, and this notion of a transition plan, right? Which is where you really, if you were actually doing your TCFD properly, you'd be able to like press a button and transition plan, right? Because that's kind of the point. And although there's probably something a little bit more passive unless you say, what is your transition plan, And some of that planning stuff is stuff that investors can use, right? And there's probably about 10 frameworks out there that cover it. We try and map against all of them and make sure that we're asking questions against all of those indicators. But there's a long way to go before you have companies disclose all those metrics, because some of them are really far-reaching. I think that the work of the TPT in the UK, the task force, has been great in really trying to kind of anchor that and give it a hook back in with the FCA working so closely on it, try and get it into that kind of reporting space from a regulation perspective. And there are gaps. I mean, we've got, of the 18,000 companies who disclosed last year, only 4,000 of them said they had a transition plan or a 1.5 degree aligned transition plan, and of them, I think it's 81 companies actually disclosed against all those metrics. So you can invest in those 81 companies, which doesn't help you, right? So, but the point is, I think that starts to allow the finance sector to have a conversation with the portfolio, because they can see against those indicators, have you done this, or we just haven't disclosed it? Like, these are your gaps, what you're doing. Because I think the whole point, as you were saying, we will need to invest in the transition, not necessarily in just the transitioned and the new, right? Especially in the tough sectors. And you're going to need to have more sectoral roadmaps that are coming out with that. And they need to be ambitious, right? They need to be scientifically driven, in my view, right? And because otherwise we're constantly aligning against some world that doesn't exist. There is either the world that has like mega high transition risk, but like at least we have a few countries left. I mean, I'm being very dramatic, but it's like we're in this world of, we have this modeling that has this business as usual world, but like that doesn't exist. It's physically impossible.
Or even the best practice is physically impossible.
It's just insane, yeah. So we either have that extreme risk, or you have an extreme physical risk that wipes out half those assets, potentially, like that bad. And so we need to have those kind of roadmaps be really ambitious and hairy scary. And unless people are really leaning into that from that perspective, I don't know, I think we're just talking around the edges of a myth at the moment.
Just a final remark, just because there is regulations that is coming, and just because we do mention about the finance part, the work that the EBA is doing on the Pillar 3 and mapping out not only the transition risks coming from fossil fuels, but also physical risks, is massive into into energizing, I would say, the finance sector to actually bring out that information to investors. Again, we're not there yet, but I think, well, us as a data provider and others are doing our best in order to bring that insight into investors, into, again, figuring out the blind spots.
Dora, do you have any reflections on that? And then if we have any other questions, please pop up your hand.
Well, I think it's been a great session overall, very inspiring. I would definitely go away with a positive spirit about it. And hairy scary, I think that's a, that's a great label for anything that we do from now on.
Yeah, exactly. How are we doing for time? We are over time. All right. I didn't see the 5 minutes. I was like, I kind of felt like it was. I thought it was okay. I think that means we'll probably once again have to miss the poll. I do apologise. All right. Well, thank you ever so much, everybody. Really, really appreciate you joining me today. We have one final session with CEO John Orchard and Desiree Flixless. I'd love for you to come up to the stage. Thank you ever so much, everybody. Really appreciate it. Yeah.